Hi there, students! I'm Puppy-Sensei, the Puppy Girl Japanese teacher VTuber of Irium US. I make Japanese language content to help you level up your abilities. This week's grammar point is going to be a pretty easy one. We'll be learning about dake. This is a really elementary grammar point that would be considered N5 grammar, with N5 being the most basic level of the Japanese Language Placement Test, or JLPT. This feels like a really good time for me to provide a reminder that I also offer private Japanese lessons, and I've helped other students prepare for all levels of the JLPT. You can always book me for private lessons at puppysensei.com. That's puppy-sensei.com. But yeah, we're not here to talk about that. We are here to learn dake. So let's start with the grammar card. As I said from the outset, dake is pretty easy to use. In most cases, it's just going to slot in immediately after the thing that you want to describe as only in any sentence where you want to use it. It can follow a verb in the dictionary form to express that you are only doing that thing, only doing that verb. It can follow a noun to express that only that noun is relevant to the sentence. Maybe only that noun is doing that thing. It can follow an e adjective or a na adjective to express that only those adjectives are valid for the given target element. Let's look at a quick example, and we're going to set up our use of dake. So first, we're going to look at a sentence that does not use dake. That sentence is going to be like this. Inu ga iru kaiga. Kaiga means a painting. Ga iru is a full verbal unit. It's a particle plus a verb, and we can translate it as something exists, or there is something. And in this case, the something that exists is inu, which means dog, like me. This is also a reminder that iru is the Japanese verb of existence used for animate things. Iru is the verb of existence used for things that are alive, but for inanimate things, for things that can't move, things that are not alive, we would use aru. So ga iru and ga aru. And remember as well that ga is a particle that's used to create the subject of any verb of existence. So we're going to use it with this ga aru, ga iru kind of construction. Yes, we will use ga in other cases as well, but we know that if we're using iru or aru to express that something exists, we're almost definitely going to be using ga immediately before the verb to express the existence of that thing. Now, so far, I think this is a very easy sentence to understand. Inu ga iru kaiga. It's a picture that contains a dog. Notice that this is really just a noun phrase. What are we describing? A picture. What's in the picture? Inu. How do we know? Because inu ga iru kaiga. It's a picture containing a dog. Now, let's add in dake. So our new sentence is inu dake ga iru kaiga. Inu dake ga iru kaiga. Because we're describing a picture that only contains a dog, we want to make sure that dake follows inu. This way, inu is marked as the only element that's pertinent to this given situation. Therefore, inu dake ga iru kaiga means a picture that contains only a dog, or contains nothing but a dog. Now, there's a tiny nuance that we can see playing out between these two sentences that I'm showing you here, right? These sentences look almost identical, and their meaning is also almost identical, right? So the two little phrases that we have here are inu dake ga iru kaiga and inu dake iru kaiga. The nuance between these two sentences is that the second sentence feels way more casual. However, the first sentence, which includes both dake and the particle ga, increases the emphasis on the only aspect of the sentence, right? And so casually, colloquially, when you're talking to people, dropping a particle is something that can happen from time to time. And especially with something like dake, which itself is a particle, Dake can sometimes just kind of slot in and substitute for the particle. In fact, using dake in place of the particle might even be more common, right? So a very, very common, very casual sentence, or at least noun phrase, would be inu dake iru kaiga. Inu dake iru kaiga ですね. A painting with just a dog in it. But if we have both the dake and the ga in this little noun phrase, then we have inu dake ga iru kaiga, a painting with only a dog, right? We're emphasizing both of these things. In a way, it kind of puts the focus on dake here. Isn't it? This dake is a fairly basic grammatical point, and so I feel like in this grammar top, I can also remind you of some very, very basic grammatical elements. So we should remember that generally speaking in Japanese, we really don't have to specify for a number of elements, right? Technically speaking, Japanese doesn't have a plural, and that means inu dake ga iru kaiga could just as easily mean a painting that contains nothing but dogs, plural, right? One painting, in the painting there are only dogs, maybe a bunch of them. Maybe there's only one of them. The sentence doesn't necessarily specify, because as I said, Japanese doesn't really have plurals. Now, there are ways to get around that. We could use counter words. For dogs, the counter word is usually hiki, yeah? And we could use that counter word to express this is a painting that contains only 2 dogs, or only 7 dogs, or whatever it is, right? But we're not going to dive into that because today is not a lesson on counter words. As I said from the outset, though, we can use dake with verbs. Let's look at an example of such a sentence. 最近味噌汁を食べるだけです。ね、最近味噌汁を食べるだけです。The meaning of the sentence implies that lately the only thing that I've been doing is eating miso soup. Maybe I'm sick and I'm laying in bed and the only thing that I'm doing is just over and over, miso soup, miso soup. I've actually been there. That's a real thing that I had to do for like a month and a half. Let's not get into it. But let's compare this sentence with a similar one, okay? So the other sentence that we're going to compare this with is 最近味噌汁だけを食べます, right? Notice that we have moved the dake. Before, the dake was modifying 食べる. And now, the dake is modifying 味噌汁. In the sentence at the top, dake is describing the action of 食べる, to eat. The nuance of this sentence is that the action of eating miso soup is the only thing that you've been doing. All I do lately is eat miso. On the other hand, when we have dake marking the noun in the second sentence, then we're marking that noun as the only thing that's valid for that particular verb, right? It sets up a different nuance. I do other stuff, but when it comes to eating, the only thing I'm eating is miso, right? Makes sense, I hope. And then, dake can also be used with any adjective, which means that we can additionally describe something as only this way or only that way. Therefore, we can get sentences like this one. 漢字は非常に難しいだけだ。ね、漢字は非常に難しいだけだ。The use of adjective plus dake here is relatively easy to understand, I think. 漢字は非常に難しいだけだ. The only way that you can describe kanji is that it's extremely difficult, right? Kanji is just really hard. Now, I don't necessarily agree. I personally think that kanji are very, very, very fascinating, and they don't particularly become too difficult for me. Am I tooting my own horn a little bit? I don't know. Before we end this episode, there's one more thing that I would like to touch on regarding dake. Let's go back to the grammar card for just a moment. There's another meaning of dake that deploys in the exact same way grammatically, but the nuance is just slightly different. And it's going to be context, of course, that lets us know the distinction between these two meanings. What do I mean by that? I mean that at the level of the grammar, these two different meanings will probably look almost exactly identical, right? But through the context of the conversation, through the context of what is being conveyed. Just like in my previous example about dogs, right? Whether it's only one dog that's in the painting or whether it's multiple dogs that's in the painting, it's only through context that we're going to get that meaning. And similarly, whether dake means only or just, or whether dake means as much as or at least, we're going to get that idea through context, right? So let's look at this example sentence. Kanji wa muzukashii. Yeah, we already established that. Kanji wa muzukashii. Sore kara, therefore, dekiru dake benkyou shite imasu. All I'm doing is studying as much as possible. Yeah. We really have two separate thoughts here. First, kanji is difficult. Kanji wa muzukashii. Yeah. And then the second thought is, therefore, sore kara, dekiru dake, as much as is possible, benkyou shite imasu. I am studying. As I said, it's really just context that gets us to this translation, but you can easily see that only isn't really going to work with a verb like dekiru, right? When we're marking dekiru with dake to create dekiru dake, the best translation would be as much as possible. I suppose we could instead offer an alternate translation, like the only thing I'm able to do is to study, which carries, I guess, a similar nuance to as much as possible. But the point is that you should be careful of how you translate dake into English. Grammatically, it's going to look pretty similar, but the nuance can change from only doing this or doing this with all your might or all your power or as much as possible. Especially when you have that phrase, dekiru dake. Now, there's actually even one additional nuance of dake that we're not going to cover today, as I've decided that I want to save it for a future lesson. But we'll get to that another time. Which means that we're just dake covering this today. Let's spin our wheel of grammar to see what we're going to be learning next time. Here we go. Next week, we will be learning koto ni naru. Oh, I'm excited. I like koto ni naru as a grammar point, so this is going to be a fun lesson next week. I'll see you then. Mata raishu!